Nu u bijna dagelijks Al Gore over het scherm ziet komen in zijn strijd tegen George Bush de jongere, gaan wij eens terug naar 1988, toen Michael Dukakis de strijd aanbond tegen George Bush de oudere. En niemand minder dan Dukakis zelf vertelt ons hoe ontstellend hard het daar toen toe ging. Harder dan ooit daarvoor of daarna in de Amerikaanse presidentsverkiezingen en zeker harder dan in de keurige campagne van nu. En toch, de vergelijking met nu is leerzaam. En daarom straks in één moeite door de laatste prognose. Goedenavond. Er is weinig in de politiek waar je met zoveel weerzin naar kunt kijken als de Amerikaanse presidentsverkiezingen. Stupide slogans, vals patriotisme, kandidaten die een buikspreekpop van hun opiniepeilers zijn en niets anders meer zeggen dan wat stemmen wint. Met echte overtuiging heeft het weinig meer te maken. En toch zijn die campagnes voor een presidentschap een perfecte test. Want ook al zijn de kandidaten met niets anders bezig dan tactiek, trucs, gelonk hier, gekonkel daar, ze vechten daarmee in het openbaar uit wie het beste is in het veroveren van macht. En dat is in de kern precies waar het om gaat. Te laten zien dat je geschikt bent voor de rol van machtigste man in het machtigste land ter wereld. Al zou je het niet altijd zeggen als je naar die trekpoppen kijkt, je moet daar een bijzonder type mens voor zijn. Je moet de strijd om de macht als een spel kunnen zien. Jezelf koelbloedig als pion kunnen inzetten. En voor de Democraten was de vraag in 1988, kan Michael Dukakis dat? Dukakis, succesvol gouverneur van Massachusetts, was een absolute technocraat. Onkreukbaar, maar ook kleurloos en niet echt een geboren campagnetijger. Maar wie weet, zo was de hoop, zou dat onkreukbare in elk geval een voordeel geven op zijn tegenstander, George Bush. Al 8 jaar vicepresident onder Reagan en daarmee vertegenwoordiger van een regering die op dat moment tot aan de nek in de schandalen zat. En dus ging er oprecht gejuich op toen Dukakis op de Democratische Conventie, juli 1988, voorgesteld werd door zijn nicht, de actrice Olympia Dukakis.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with honor, with pride, and with love that I give you Michael S. Dukakis.
Free, only one will be free. With our clothes, hang on to a dream.
We're going to win because we are the party that believes in the American dream.
The best America, the best America, the best America is yet to come.
I know that what it all comes down to this election is the man at the desk. And who should sit at that desk? My friends, I am that man.
Good morning. Pleasure. You made it. We made it. Okay, we had some good meetings yesterday with students, and those will continue today. Let me just go over this a little bit. Lindsay, you're coming in at 10:30? This is a great country. It's a country that today happens to be doing quite well in broad terms economically. It's also a country with the greatest gap between rich and poor of any of the advanced industrialized nations in the world. It's a country where most of the income growth over the past 25 or 30 years has gone to the wealthiest 20% of the population. And it was a country in 1988 where there were whole regions that were hurting very badly economically. Our farms were in trouble, and there were regions of the country, the Midwest was being called the Rust Belt because its traditional industrial base was collapsing. And I'm one of these people who believes very, very strongly that every single American ought to have a full measure of economic opportunity. I don't mean a handout, but economic opportunity, and that the job of the President of the United States, working with the Congress and the American people, is to make sure that happens.
He pretty much knew what he wanted to talk about. He knew why he was in politics, and he knew what he wanted to get done. And he had been through a lot of campaigns here in Massachusetts. So he had a pretty good sense of himself as he campaigned and what he wanted to talk about. There are other people who run for office who you can pretty much put words in their mouth and tell them this is what the poll says, and they'll say it. Mike Dukakis was never like that.
My pollster came to me, and he said the one thing that's moving voters, undecided voters, is when we ask them whether or not we ought to get tough on trade. In effect, become protectionist. And you really, if you want to win this thing, you ought to become a protectionist. I said to him, I'm not a protectionist. I mean, I don't care what your polls say. I'm not going to change what for me have been views that I've held for a long time.
There were votes to be had in it. People told him that, and he was never comfortable with that because he thought it was divisive. So he wouldn't do it.
What did you think then?
Well, I mean, I would have liked a strategy to get us over 50%, but I respected him for the fact that he wasn't going to engage in anything that he thought was divisive.
We're going to build a kind of America where hard work is rewarded, where American goods and American workmanship are the best in the world. That's what this election is all about. By working together to create opportunity and a good life for all of us are enriched, not just in economic terms, but as citizens and as human beings.
For a new era of economic greatness in America, Michael Dukakis for president.
Good evening. On behalf of the Commission on Presidential Debates, I am pleased to welcome you to the second presidential debate. The candidates are Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee, and Governor Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee.
How did you prepare for the debates?
Practice. You essentially, the candidate set up a room similar with the podiums that will be similar to the podiums at the debate. You have a tape recorder, and you run through practice sessions. With someone playing the part of the opposing candidate, individuals playing the parts of journalists who might be asking questions, and you just rehearse the answers. You guess the questions and you rehearse the answers.
There are no restrictions on the questions that my colleagues and I can ask this evening, and the candidates have no prior knowledge of our questions. By agreement between the candidates, the first question goes to Governor Dukakis. You have 2 minutes to respond.
In the second debate, you got a very hard question, the first question, put to you by Bernard Shaw. You remember that question?
It wasn't a hard question. The problem is it had been asked of me about 1,000 times, and I responded to it as if I was answering it for about the 1,000th time. Because if you're against the death penalty, you're asked that question all the time.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America.
It's an important character question. And so he was stepping into it he was going to give the same answer he's always given, which is yes, I would still oppose it. And he probably was a little startled. I'm sure he was startled by it.
By the question so sudden?
Or just the image of it.
The thing that I think you have to bear in mind is that you may have been asked that question 1,000 times, but most of the people that are watching you are really watching you in a debate context for the first time. And if I made a mistake in that debate, it was in not being sensitive to that. And so a lot of people said, gee, that's kind of unfeeling and insensitive and so forth. Well, I guess it was, or at least it appeared to be. I mean, anybody who knows me knows how important Kitty Dukakis is to me and to my life and who I am. But I didn't say it in that way, and I think that was something that obviously I should have done.
We were disappointed. He was disappointed. But it was a difficult situation to be in. He also had not, he was kind of ill that day. So there was some question as to whether he could he had to summon a lot of adrenaline and energy, I think, just to debate it all. So it was a very unfortunate first question to get.
Dat ongelukkige antwoord legde een pijnlijke zwakte van de kandidaat Dukakis bloot. Hij kende zijn zaakjes wel, maar hij miste een zintuig voor de meer sentimentele verlangens van de kiezer. Het ontbrak hem aan warmte, aan menselijkheid. En het vervelende was dat hij als een echte technocraat weigerde daar het probleem van in te zien. Daarmee toonde Dukakis zijn Achilleshiel. Want door van zichzelf geen warm menselijk beeld te scheppen, gaf hij anderen een kans een beeld voor hem te scheppen. En zijn tegenstander maakte daar vervolgens ongekend gebruik van. In de peilingen lag Bush door de schandalen rond de Reagan-administration zo ver achter dat de strijd voor hem nooit meer te winnen was op zakelijke argumenten. Dat was het terrein van Dukakis. Maar die beeldvorming. De campagnestaf van Bush besloot tot een zogeheten paint job van Dukakis. Een verfje dat de kleurloze kandidaat in de ogen van de kiezer zou veranderen in niet minder dan een gevaar voor de natie. Onder het motto America can't afford that risk. De Director of Opposition Research van de campagne, de directeur onderzoek tegenstander, groef tenslotte net zo lang in het verleden van Dukakis tot hij een paar punten vond die, mits flink uitvergroot, het monsterlijke van de man zouden laten zien. En zo zag Dukakis tot zijn groeiende verbijstering een serie televisieadvertenties op zich afkomen waarin hij, de reden zelf, werd afgeschilderd als een man die onverantwoord links was, een echte liberal, die belastingen verhoogde, geld over de balk smeet en vooral die veroordeelde moordenaars op weekendverlof liet gaan, zodat ze op de dag des Heren moordend en verkrachtend door Amerika konden jagen.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
Horton, while out on furlough, assaulted a woman who happened to be white. Fortunately, didn't kill her, but assaulted her brutally. And it was a notorious and angry kind of case that certainly brought a lot of criticism on me here in Massachusetts. And Bush used that as kind of a metaphor for my being soft on crime.
The Bush campaign realized this was a powerful argument. They took it to another level, which was an allied group of theirs started running ads with Willie Horton's picture. They actually darkened the photo to make him look darker. That was designed to inflame racial tension. They weren't running the election as a contest of ideas. They were running the election as a contest of dividing groups as much as they can and using any means available to them to do it. Legal means, to be sure, but racially divisive.
Do you remember seeing that ad for the first time?
No, I don't.
Do you know what you thought when you saw it?
This is going to kill us.
As governor, Michael Dukakis vetoed mandatory sentences for drug dealers. He vetoed the death penalty. His revolving door prison policy gave weekend furloughs to first-degree murderers not eligible for parole. While out, many committed other crimes like kidnapping and rape, and many are still at large. Now Michael Dukakis says he wants to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts. America can't afford that risk.
The fact of the matter is that in 1988, the most liberal furlough program in America was the Reagan-Bush furlough program in the federal prison system, where they were furloughing people not for 72 hours, but for up to 45 days. One of their furloughees went out and murdered a young pregnant mother in the Southwest while on furlough. Reagan himself, while governor of California, had a very liberal furlough program. 2 of his furloughees murdered people, and he defended the program. I never said that.
He didn't want to lower the tone of the debate, and he wanted to talk about what he wanted to do for the country. Yeah. And the problem was that the political climate by 1988 did not allow the campaign to be conducted on that level. So no matter how much one wanted to get out to a higher level, you're operating in a context, and the context was such, and the culture, the media, the culture, the other campaign, It's not totally up to you. So you can be dragged into the mud whether you want to or not. And we were slow to recognize all of those influences.
Lee Atwater had telegraphed what they were going to do in May. So we knew what they were going to do.
Lee Atwater being the...
Lee Atwater being one of Bush's top campaign people. And we should have been ready for it.
The reason we were slow to react is that we were operating on some advice given by many people, many experienced politicians, that we were not to debate on their ground. People wouldn't accept it. People wouldn't believe that about a presidential candidate. You'd lower the tone of a presidential debate, a presidential campaign, back and forth debate. And that turned out to be incorrect advice.
I am getting sick and tired of my opponents complaining about the rough and tumble of this campaign. And so now all that's left is this daily whining about a negative campaign. Well, let me give the governor a little advice. If he can't stand the heat, he ought to get out of the kitchen.
I remember former President Carter saying, "This is the worst campaign ever." Would you agree?
Well, I guess at the time, Bush's attack campaign against me was unprecedented. Certainly was negative, it was certainly nasty, and apparently effective, but I blame myself for its effectiveness, because if there's a lesson to be learned from 1988, it is that if the other guy is going to come at you with an attack campaign, you'd better be ready for it, and you'd better have a very carefully thought out strategy for dealing with it.
George Bush talks a lot about prison furloughs, but he won't tell you that the Massachusetts program was started by a Republican and stopped by Mike Dukakis. And Bush won't talk about the thousands of drug kingpins furloughed from federal prisons while he led the war on drugs. Bush won't talk about this drug pusher, one of his furloughed heroin dealers, who raped and murdered Patsy Pedron, pregnant mother of 2. The real story about furloughs is that George Bush has taken a furlough from the truth.
You've got to have not just he attacks, you attack, but a much more carefully thought out strategy for dealing with him, preferably one that turns his attack campaign into a character issue on him. And we just didn't do that, and by the time we woke up to this, or I woke up to this, it was my decision, nobody else's. An awful lot of damage had been done, and I never recovered.
I'd like to follow up on that, Mr. Vice President. The tenor of the campaign you've been running in terms of both the issues and your rhetoric has surprised even some of your friends. Senator Mark Hatfield, who's known your family a long time and who knew your father, the late Senator Prescott Bush, said, and I quote, "If his father were alive today, I'm sure his father would see it as a shocking transformation."
Well, I think my dad would be pretty proud of me because I think we've come a long, long way. And I think, 3 months ago, I remember some of the great publications in this country had written me off. And what I've had to do is to define not just my position, but to define his. And I hope I've done it fairly.
There was another troubling thing in the campaign. It's called the L word. Yeah. Liberal.
Right.
You were attacked of being out of the mainstream and
right.
a liberal.
Yeah.
I am not going to let Governor Dukakis go through this election without explaining some of these very liberal positions. He's the one that said, I am a liberal, traditional liberal, progressive liberal Democrat.
1 minute from Governor Dukakis.
Well, Margaret, we've heard it again tonight, and I'm not surprised. The labels, I guess the Vice President called me a liberal 2 or 3 times, said I was coming from the left. In 1980, President Reagan called you a liberal for voting for federal gun control. And this is something Republicans have used for a long time. They tried it with Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and John Kennedy. It's not labels. It's our vision of America. And we have 2 fundamentally different visions of America. The Vice President is complacent, thinks we ought to stick with the status quo, doesn't think we ought to move ahead, thinks that things are okay as they are. I don't.
Did Michael Dukakis answer well on the charge you are a liberal?
I think he, at some point late in the campaign, decided to say, yeah, I'm a liberal. Probably we should have done that either at the convention or immediately after the convention. Just said, yeah, I'm a liberal if it means, it was a John F. Kennedy had given an answer. I'm a liberal if it means spending on healthcare and education. But I'm not if it means, you know.
If by liberal they mean, as they want people to believe, someone who is against local government and who is unconcerned with the taxpayer's dollar, then the record of this party and its members demonstrate that we are not that kind of liberal. But if by a liberal they mean someone who looks ahead and not behind, someone who welcomes new ideas without rigid reactions, someone who cares about the welfare of the people, their health, their housing, their schools, their jobs, their civil rights and their civil liberties, someone who believes that we can break through the stalemate and suspicions that grip us in our policies abroad. If that is what they mean by a liberal, then I'm proud to say that I'm a liberal.
Yeah, that was the answer he eventually gave.
But that was mid-October.
Right.
And when Ted Koppel asked him on 25th of October, Governor, can you define liberal in 1988? In Nightline, he ducked the question again.
How do you define the word liberal? What is a liberal in 1988?
That's maybe a question that we ought to ask George Bush if he had been here.
No, I'd like to hear what your definition.
Well, I think all of us have combinations of liberal and conservative about us, Ted. I'm not
Governor,
a label.
forgive me, that's been your answer now for 3 months.
Yeah, but
I'd like to hear what you define. What is a liberal?
Well, if one is a liberal in the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and John Kennedy, and I'm
1988, Governor.
One is somebody who cares deeply about people, sees concerns, sees opportunities to make a real difference in the lives of real people, and works hard in public service to help make that difference in a way that will improve the quality of life of all of our people. But like most people, I have certain conservative instincts as well.
I tried to be quite clear about where I thought I was a liberal, a progressive, whatever word you want to use. I mean, I'm somebody who believes that society has a responsibility to act when it comes to dealing with some of these issues, and I said so.
But didn't people get the impression that you were sort of ducking the question?
I don't know. I mean, I tried to be as honest as I possibly could.
I still don't think you get it. They have labeled you, they, the Republicans in this case, as a liberal, which has a meaning to people. May not be the meaning that exists in your head. It has this kind of meaning.
Mike Dukakis and Willie Horton changed our lives forever when Governor Dukakis gave him a few days off. Horton broke into our home. For 12 hours, I was beaten, slashed, and terrorized. My wife, Angie, was brutally raped. When his liberal experiment failed, Dukakis simply looked away. He also vetoed the death penalty bill. Regardless of the election, we worry that people don't know enough about Mike Dukakis.
I'm going to do my best to be a fine president and a good leader and somebody you can be proud of.
And then you lost.
Then I lost.
He was a little disheartened, and he was a little, I think he blamed himself, and he was, you know, he had a tough year after that. But I think he's gotten over it, and is pretty lucid on what the current state of politics is, and still grinds away at the things he cares about and at teaching.
One of the problems is that campaigns are very long in this country, as you all know. And the press that's following you, which gets bigger and bigger and bigger post-convention, as you can imagine. I mean, there are 300, 400, 500 people following these candidates, each of them. I mean, they start getting bored. Candidates start getting bored. I mean, how many times can you say the same thing differently? And remember, these guys have been campaigning for what, 14, 15 months already? Do I regret the decision to run for the presidency? No. It has, even though I didn't do very well, given me an opportunity to speak out on issues and to be heard. And so in the long run, I mean, this is a plus. What isn't a plus, obviously, is that I lost. I turned the country over to George Bush for 4 years. I mean, that's sinful.
Right. That's sinful?
Sinful. I regret that very much.
You did a sinful thing.
I did a sinful thing in turning the country over to George Bush.
Zondig. Een wel erg groot woord, zou je zo zeggen. Maar als je de spotjes van de Republikeinen goed bekijkt, is het eigenlijk zo gek nog niet. Eerst zie je Bush en Dukakis naast elkaar. Bush in een stralend zonnetje. Dukakis met een licht ongure baardschaduw in het donker. Bush verdwijnt uiteindelijk. Dukakis schuift onguur en wel op naar het midden en verandert dan in de nog veel onguurdere Willie Horton. Presidentskandidaat en moordenaar. Broeders in de misdaad. En het gruwelijke, dat werkt dus. Als vicepresident was Bush in 1988 een symbool voor een regeerstijl vol schandalen. Een regeerstijl die volgens de kiezers niet deugde. Hij begon vervolgens aan een presidentscampagne die al helemaal niet deugde. En zie daar, hij won. Hij won, want hij was de kandidaat die erin slaagde het publiek te raken op de cruciale plek, in de onderbuik. Daar wordt kennelijk een presidentsverkiezing beslist. En daarom durf ik de voorspelling wel aan dat opnieuw een Bush gaat winnen. Want Gore is toch meer een Dukakis, de harde technocraat. Bush, een echte Bush. Beter thuis in de buikstreek. Goed, daar laten we het bij voor deze week. Volgende week zijn we er niet, dan viert de VARA op dit net een jubileum. Maar u moet maar denken, dan heeft u een hele week extra om van onze website te genieten. www.anderetijden.nl. Dit was Andere Tijden. Terug naar de onze.